Welcome to our deep dive. You guys, it's all about culture today.
Yeah.
We've got some really cool excerpts from a podcast episode about it. I was looking through it before, and honestly, it's got me thinking about like a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
In a way I just hadn't before.
It's really amazing. You know, when you think about it, how much we just kind of take culture for granted.
Right.
Like we're surrounded by it constantly, right?
Yeah.
But we don't really often stop and think about like how much it actually shapes our lives.
I know, it's so true. And like when I was reading this, I was thinking about how even just simple greetings can say a lot about a culture's values.
For sure.
You know, like in some cultures, like a handshake is expected, right? Or in others, maybe like a bow is more common.
Mm-hmm.
And it made me realize how much we communicate without even really like saying anything.
It's funny because it's like those unspoken rules are often the most powerful ones.
Totally.
They're like this hidden code that kind of guides our interactions, you know?
Yeah.
It's so easy to totally misunderstand things when you're not aware of them.
Yeah, for sure. So how does this podcast episode that we're looking at define culture? Like, what do they say?
Well, they use this term, invisible force, which I think is actually a really good way to describe it.
Hey.
It's like this web, you know, of like traditions and beliefs, values, even just like the objects we use every day that really shape who we are and how we see the world. And then it gets passed down through generations, almost like a collective memory.
That makes a lot of sense. So it's not just about the big things, right? Like national holidays or clothing or like the things you can really see.
Yeah.
It's also about all those subtle ways that we interact with each other.
Exactly.
Or the way we express our emotions or even think.
Totally.
And one of the most fascinating things I think about culture is that it's constantly evolving.
Yeah.
So like as we interact with other cultures, we get introduced to new ideas and practices. And our own traditions change.
Sure.
You mentioned interacting with other cultures, and that makes me think about like globalization.
Yeah.
Isn't there a risk that globalization could lead to everyone being the same?
That's a great question.
Like culturally.
It's something a lot of people are talking about these days.
Yeah.
And there's no easy answer, really.
Right.
Like, on the one hand, being exposed to other cultures can really broaden our horizons.
Yeah.
You know, it challenges our assumptions and can lead to new innovations and ways of thinking.
Totally.
But at the same time, there's a real concern about losing what makes each culture unique.
Yeah, I bet that comes up a lot when people talk about the internet and social media.
For sure.
Because you've got people from all over the world connecting.
Right.
But it's also like a platform for dominant cultures to have a really big influence.
Definitely. It's a double-edged sword.
Yeah.
It's up to us to try to be mindful of the downsides
while
still using its power to connect with each other.
Right.
And learn from each other in good ways.
So let's bring it back down to like the individual level. What does all this mean for me or for like the listener?
Well, for one thing, it means that our background really shapes how we see and interact with the world in really big ways, often without us even realizing it.
I'm starting to see that.
Yeah.
Like I never really stopped to think about how my upbringing influences how I communicate or how I solve problems.
It's important to be aware of that.
Yeah.
Like once we start to recognize what's shaping our own views, we can understand others better.
Totally. And this podcast episode mentions collectivism versus individualism. Can you explain that a little bit more?
Of course. So in collectivist cultures, the focus is on group harmony and interdependence and shared goals. So, for example, in a lot of Asian cultures, decisions are often made as a group.
Okay.
And individual needs might come second to the group's needs.
So it's more about we than me.
Exactly right. And then individualistic cultures are more about individual achievements, self-reliance, personal expression.
Got it.
So, for instance, in American culture, there's a big emphasis on standing out and pursuing your own dreams.
Yeah.
Even if it means going against what other people think.
That's a really interesting contrast. I could see how those different values could cause problems.
Oh, yeah.
If people aren't aware of them.
For sure. Like, imagine someone from a collectivist culture working with people from an individualistic culture.
Yeah.
They might feel confused or offended if their colleagues seem too assertive or unwilling to compromise.
Or vice versa.
Exactly.
Like somebody from an individualistic culture might get frustrated.
Yeah.
Working in a place where everything is decided by consensus.
Right.
And individual initiative isn't really valued as much.
That's why it's so important to understand these cultural values.
Totally.
It helps us to understand each other's behavior and communication styles, which helps us all work together better and have better relationships.
This is making me rethink how I talk to people.
Yeah.
Especially people I don't know very well. It's so interesting to think about all the things that might be going on under the surface.
Right.
Because of our different cultures.
And it's not just about avoiding conflict.
Yeah.
Understanding each other can also lead to new ideas and innovation.
Right. When you bring together people with different perspectives and ways of thinking,
yeah,
you're going to get some new ideas.
It's like adding different spices to a dish.
I love that.
Each one brings its own flavor, and when you combine them, you create something delicious.
So we've talked about understanding cultural values.
Yeah.
But what about language itself?
Oh, yeah.
This podcast episode says that language is like a cultural artifact. What does that mean?
It means that language isn't just a tool to communicate.
Okay.
It's a part of our culture and reflects our values and beliefs.
Right.
And the way we see the world, even the structure of a language, can affect how we think.
Wow.
For example, some languages have specific words for things that don't exist in other languages.
Okay.
And that can impact how people think about those concepts.
So it's not just about learning the words, but also understanding where they come from.
Exactly. Think about idioms and expressions.
Yeah.
They often don't translate literally.
Right.
And you need to understand the culture to really get them.
That reminds me of this time.
Oh, yeah. Tell me about it.
I was traveling in Europe.
Okay.
And I tried to use this phrase I thought meant thank you. But it turns out it meant something more like, excuse me.
Oh, no.
So it's like a really awkward moment.
I can only imagine. Yeah. Those are the kinds of things that really make you realize how important it is to be aware of those little cultural differences.
Yeah.
Even a small misunderstanding can have a big impact.
It definitely made me realize I had a lot to learn. But it also made me want to learn more about different languages and how they connect to culture.
That's great. Curiosity is so important.
Yeah.
The more we learn about other cultures, the more we understand the world and the people in it.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about communication and how cultural differences can affect it.
Right.
What about other parts of our lives? Like, how does culture influence social interactions or traditions?
Oh, it influences pretty much everything.
Yeah.
Let's take social interactions, for example.
Okay.
Think about the role of family in different cultures. In some cultures, family is everything.
Yeah.
And decisions are made with the whole extended family in mind.
Right.
But in other cultures, individual independence is more important.
Okay.
And people might prioritize their own needs or their immediate family over distant relatives.
That makes sense. And I imagine there are different norms around things like respecting elders.
Oh, absolutely.
Or showing affection in public.
Yeah, in some cultures, it's really disrespectful to disagree with an elder.
Yeah.
While in others, debating and challenging authority is totally normal.
Right.
And it's the same with public displays of affection.
Yeah.
Totally fine in one culture, but seen as inappropriate in another.
It's crazy how something as simple as a hug or a kiss on the cheek can have different meanings.
Totally.
Depending on the culture. I remember reading that in some cultures, eye contact is a sign of respect.
Yeah.
But in others, it can be seen as aggressive.
Exactly. It just shows how even nonverbal communication can have all these different cultural meanings.
And speaking of nonverbal communication, we can't forget about traditions and customs.
Oh, for sure. Traditions are so fascinating.
Yeah.
They give you a real window into a culture's history and values and beliefs.
Totally.
Everything from holidays to weddings to everyday routines can tell you so much about how people live and interact.
And they often have a deeper meaning.
Right.
Than just being fun or entertaining.
Exactly. Traditions help to strengthen social bonds. They preserve cultural heritage.
Right.
And they give people a sense of belonging.
I'm thinking about my own family's holiday traditions. They might seem weird to someone from another culture.
Yeah.
But to me, they represent connection and warmth and a shared history that goes way back.
That's the beauty of traditions.
Yeah.
They connect us to our past and give us a sense of who we are.
Totally.
And even though traditions can feel timeless, they're always evolving as cultures change and adapt to new things.
That's a good point. Culture isn't static.
No.
It's alive and always changing.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so interesting to study.
Yeah.
It's like trying to understand a really complex ecosystem with all its different parts and how they interact and change.
This conversation has made it so clear how much we can learn from each other, especially when we come from different backgrounds.
For sure. It's not always easy to understand those differences.
Right.
But it's so worth it.
Yeah. Embracing cultural diversity can lead to better relationships and more creative collaborations. And a deeper understanding of ourselves and the world.
I completely agree.
So how can we put all this into practice? How can we become more culturally aware and sensitive in our everyday lives?
Well, it starts with curiosity.
Okay.
And a willingness to learn.
Got it.
Read books, watch documentaries, talk to people from different cultures.
Right.
Travel if you can.
Yeah.
And don't be afraid to ask questions. Most people are happy to share their culture.
Yeah.
If you're genuinely interested.
That's good advice. And it's important to remember that cultural awareness isn't about becoming an expert on every culture.
Right.
It's more about approaching interactions with humility and empathy and an open mind.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that our own culture shapes how we see things.
Yeah.
And that other people's perspectives can add to our own.
Right.
It's about moving beyond just tolerating differences.
Yeah.
To really appreciating and understanding them.
And it's about being willing to challenge our own assumptions and biases.
Absolutely.
Sometimes we don't even realize how our culture has shaped our thinking until we see things from a different point of view.
It's an ongoing process of learning and reflecting on ourselves. Well, it's so worth it.
So as we keep exploring this topic, I'm curious how this podcast episode talks about the practical side of cultural awareness.
Okay.
It feels like we've laid a good foundation. But what are some ways we can actually use these ideas in our lives?
That's a great question. The podcast emphasizes that cultural awareness isn't just about knowledge.
Yeah.
It's about using that knowledge to connect with people.
Right.
On a deeper level, it's about understanding that their experiences and values and beliefs might be different from our own.
Yeah.
But that doesn't make them any less important.
It's about putting ourselves in their shoes.
Exactly.
And trying to see the world the way they do.
That's where empathy comes in.
Right.
It's about being empathetic and using that to build understanding.
That makes me think about a time when I was working on this project with a team from a really different culture. And I was so focused on getting things done and sticking to the schedule that I didn't really try to understand where they were coming from.
Right.
And it caused a lot of frustration and miscommunication until I finally slowed down and made an effort to connect with them personally. And once I did that, the whole project just totally changed.
That's a perfect example of how even when we're trying to do the right thing, we can accidentally create problems if we don't think about those cultural differences. But it's good to hear that making that effort to connect can make such a big difference.
It really was a huge learning experience for me.
Yeah.
So as we kind of wrap up our deep dive into this topic, are there any other key takeaways from the podcast episode that we haven't talked about yet?
Well, one thing that really stuck with me was how they emphasized that cultural awareness is like an ongoing thing.
Okay.
It's not like you reach a point and you're done.
Right.
It's a journey we're always learning and changing. And as we encounter new cultures and ideas, we need to be open to changing our understanding.
I like that it's easy to think we've got it all figured out.
Yeah.
But there's always more to learn.
Right. And that's a good thing.
It is.
That curiosity is so important.
Yeah.
For anyone who wants to understand our world better.
Right. With all its different people and cultures. So listeners, as we finish up this deep dive into culture,
Yeah.
we hope you keep exploring and learning and challenging your own assumptions. Remember, culture affects everything in our lives.
Yeah.
From how we talk to each other to how we see the world.
Right.
And by understanding different cultures and having empathy, we can build connections and create a more inclusive world.
Absolutely. And maybe the most important thing is to have these conversations with humility and respect.
Yeah.
Every culture has its own unique beauty and wisdom.
Totally.
And there's always something we can learn from each other.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening, everyone.
We hope it's made you curious to keep learning about this amazing world of culture.